The whole film started by when I met William Kelly at the Human Rights Arts and Film Festival in Melbourne.
It was around the time of the commemoration of the First World War, when many places around the world seemed to be celebrating the war rather than feeling the tragedy of it.
For me, my body is the place where my ideas meet reality.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to iView World 2020, a human rights film festival in New York and in New Delhi. We are very excited to start one of our panels in our new series, Vital Voices Now. The name of the panel is Shifting the Gaze, Creation, Disruption, and the Politics of Representation in Visual Cultures. We're going to be exploring art and its relevance at the intersection of activism within society, spectacle, and simulacrum. The films in focus for this session are Can Art Stop a Bullet by William Kelly's Big Picture, which is directed by Mark Street and William Kelly, the artist, features William Kelly, the artist, and Fiona Cochrane, who's the producer. All of them will be joining us from Australia today. We also have with us Davide Quadrio, who's the director and founder of ArtHub, Shanghai and Italy. And Davide and Noah Cowan, who's the festival director and a curator as well, have helped us with some commissioned short films by Apichatpong Weerasethakul, who's a director from Thailand, very well known and critically acclaimed. And finally, we have with us Raghava KK and Sheba Chhachhi, who are fantastic artists from India. So we're very excited about the conversation today. And like we said, this is a new section that we are starting for the film festival, which is in its 6th edition this year. And the idea is to really look at what comprises of the new shifting visual culture around us. Especially this past year, as we've seen the pandemic and shared this crisis globally. What are the kind of images that we've seen? And in retrospect, as artists, curators, and arbitrators of culture in certain kind of way, what do we think is the relevance of art at a time like this on the world? So I'm going to start with the team of Can Art Start a Bullet? I'd like to ask any of you in no particular order, some of your thoughts about what was the impetus behind this film. But if you could tell us what started this film off, why you all felt compelled to tell this story.
I guess I'll jump in, will I? The whole film started by when I met William Kelly at the Human Rights Arts and Film Festival in Melbourne, and he was drawing a rather large picture there, and we got talking, and I realised that he had spent quite a long part of his life, most of his life, as a human rights peace activist and artist, and had an incredible story to tell. And it wasn't until a couple of years after that he was creating his big picture, which was a 4-story artwork in our state library here in Victoria. And it was going up in this most beautiful room called the reading room and the dome room. And it's a striking work that just dominates that room quite well, and I thought, well, there's a story here, and it's a bigger story than just this picture. It's got a lot to do with Bill's life and his career, and it's all embodied in this one big picture. And I just thought this really had to be told, and once you start looking at what was involved in that big picture and where it took us, it's got bigger and bigger, and then we took in the whole world. There were artists and activists that Bill had worked with in countries in every continent pretty much. And we had to include them all. It was very important to have a very diverse voice, and not just in different culture and different age, different sex, whatever. It was important to have as broad a point of view on a lot of issues that were involved in Bill's big picture. And that started a 2-year process, 3 years by now, by the time we finished, and getting it out at the beginning of this year, just about the same time as a little virus took over and changed the way that we all got to see the film.
Fiona, you've done a lot of films with artists. What draws you to these documentary films with artists? If you could tell us.
Well, I've done a lot of films with musicians, artists. Okay. I haven't done a lot of films with visual artists before. Look, I've had an interest in music for a long time, so that quite often I've done films that relate to musicians of different sorts. But but not so much visual art. Oh no, it's not entirely true. I have done a couple of other visual artists. But music probably been a bigger one, and social issues of a variety of sort, which this also fit into.
My turn.
Yes, William.
Oh, what a shame. It seemed to me as I started this, it was around the time of the commemoration of the First World War, when many places around the world seemed to be celebrating the war rather than feeling the tragedy of it, and celebrating the loss rather than mourning the deaths. And I really felt something needed to be said, or I needed to say something. And so this opportunity came up for me to work at the State Library of Victoria on this picture. And as I did, I was looking at this kind of ensemble of images, some of which are behind me, that I've used at different times over the years, much like a filmmaker or a playwright sometimes works with an ensemble cast. And starting to piece these images together, which have been a part of my journey and which I've shared with others and they've shared with me. And then as I did this, I was thinking of the names of all these people who have influenced me, who, as well as those I've collaborated with from the beginning of the 20th century, from artists like Charlie Chaplin, or in various fields, from Charlie Chaplin, say, to the Dixie Chicks, who stood up against George Bush and his view of starting a war. And I wanted to include those names in. So that's how the story went. And that's the story that Mark focused on. And I'm honored and pleased that he did it, because it has caused some dialogue amongst people in different places. And we're really honored that you've decided to include us in the festival there.
I don't want to give away, the movie. I want people to go and see that. But did you feel, more and more now, as we see the kind of devastation, the kind of, hardship that the world has had to face, especially marginalized communities, how do you feel art what is the kind of weight that art has in their lives? Do you feel that, what is the relevance of art as you see it?
You can make a film with your phone. You can edit and shoot and everything on these devices. You can draw with a bit of paper and a pencil, and it doesn't matter where you are and what situation you're in. It's always possible to do these things and to have a voice. And this is a way of getting these ideas out to express how you're feeling about this situation, whatever that situation is. And through our film, we went to different countries and different cities and spoke to different people about the way that they express themselves. And we spoke to for instance, in New York, a school full of students who were using art to express all the various things that they are feeling, and whether it be environmental or whether it be through Black Lives Matter or some sort of sexual problems. They were all expressing how they felt through just little bits of artwork that they were making. It wasn't anything expensive, wasn't anything elaborate. It could be done by an individual, and it can express quite a bit. And I think you know, as we all know, art can have this incredible impact. And this sort of art these days, activism art, if you like, is seen more and more as an important art. Look at Banksy, for instance. The value of a Banksy these days is incredible, and he's into the establishment. This sort of artwork now is in museums, it's in galleries around the world. It's recognised by the establishment as an important form of art, and it's making a big impact. And this can happen very simply by individuals. Doesn't have to be organisations or anything like that. A pencil can do it,
Right.
you know, and you can give out freely this sort of work, and it becomes synonymous with movements.
Definitely, I think that art is, you know, more and more whatever one would call activist art. I actually, for me, the word activist art is, I don't know, it's something I have to wrap my head around. I have some different kind of feelings about that. I feel like all art is political in some form or the other, even when it is not, even when it strives to disassociate itself from being political. You know, I feel like art does have an impact on the surroundings around you. And so if it changes people, or it causes change, or causes a sort of pause, then its affect makes it political. But at the same time, I know that in South Asia, there is artists are hesitant perhaps to box their work into a particular kind of label, or call it activist art, or give it any kind of like a label. So you know, at this point, I feel like it would be great to hear from one of our artists, perhaps Sheba, who has you know, who is one of India's most respected artists. So Sheba, do you want to tell us a little bit about your body of work over the years, and some of the motivations behind it, and how that's changed over the years, and especially what have you been, you know, has the relevance of that changed, or have you thought differently about this past year, as all of us have had to be still with our thoughts much more, you know, this past year. So tell us a little something about that.
Well, let me begin. I mean, you've already sort of given a basic idea of what I do. I work with, my work is lens-based, but I work across a really wide range of mediums, from very low-cost adapted street toys to fairly high-tech gaming technology. I'm not really particularly wedded to any particular form or medium, and very often it's the particular concern that I'm investigating, the kind of issue that is troubling me, that I'm beginning to think about and beginning to make work about, that will actually lead me to working with a particular medium. So it's a wide range, it's a wide range of practice. I started as a photographer, very much, and you know, recording the women's movement, primarily in Delhi and North India, across the 80s up to the 90s for about 10 to 15 years. I was as much protagonist as documentarian, sort of shouting slogans one moment and focusing the camera the next. After many years of building up what today becomes actually quite a valuable archive. I didn't think of it at that time. At that time, it was really making images for us to circulate within the movement, to share with other women struggling in other parts of the country and internationally as well, and also to resist the kind of dominant media representations of Indian women, which were either as victims or as housewives. So the image of the struggling militant woman became particularly important and significant to create. This work was shared in community spaces, in shanty towns, in women's conferences, etc. It wasn't really meant, it wasn't journalism. It wasn't for publication, etc. However, after about 10 years of this work, I began to question the nature of documentary photography itself. At that time, those debates were fairly fresh. What we, you know, the claim to truth of the documentary, the apparent objectivity, the neutrality, in fact, seemed to reproduce the kind of power relations that the dominant media did by saying this is truth, while in fact it was an interpretation. So I moved from that kind of documentary work to stage portraits, from there on to working with the photograph in space into large installations, which drew in other materials and other mediums, sculptural form, sound, projection, etc. So the concerns have been primarily around the question of gender, around women, and has expanded to work from a feminist perspective with questions of urban ecology. So for the last 10 years, the work has really engaged with issues of the contamination of the urban environment, and not just the city in which I live, which is highly toxic and polluted. In fact, I had to shut off the air purifier because the sound would disturb the recording. The conditions are severe, but when I began, they already seemed terrible to me. So I moved into creating a number of works. These are large-scale immersive installations, public art, and essentially, I seek to create what I think of as a Chintan Mandal, a think space, a space to invite the viewer participant. I don't think of this as an audience that is passively receiving and consuming whatever I have created and invited them into, but to open up critical thinking, to open up possibility of questions, to kind of offer alternative ways of looking at the particular issues that concern all of us. And this concern with building a dialogue I think is an important part of the activism in my work. I'm also not so comfortable with activist art. I think that there is on one hand the question of using artistic methods to describe or present particular contemporary issues. So I think, like my work on the women's movement, where there was absolutely no representation of women's struggle and the kind of resistance to the violence that was being faced, kind of goes into that space. I also made lots of posters, lots of work which I would call kind of agitprop. So that's one kind of activism. Then I moved away from that because in fact it seemed to demand a position where I knew the solution, that I was telling people how to think. And I really wanted to move out of that to kind of open up more complex understandings, because things are multi-layered, complex, and shifts in consciousness don't come through a kind of rhetoric of being told how to think or what to do. So I went into the art space, in fact, faced some criticism within my activist circles because it was seen as an elite space. However, I really tried to do two things. One is bring the artwork into non-elite spaces, as well as bring groups, women's groups that I worked with, community-based groups, into cultural centers where I was showing work and build conversations to open up much more complex readings, and to also share the kind of theoretical work and research that was happening, which often remained exclusive to academia and didn't actually begin to come into public discourse and public domain. So this may be a rather long response.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so I also want to raise a question about the idea of visual arts. I think we're facing a kind of period where there's a sort of tyranny of the image and of sound. And the past year has underlined that. I've always felt this, but this has made it extremely palpable for me. Like everybody else, I've spent innumerable hours on the screen, and it's become everything. It's become the place where I live, communicate, interact, think, receive, etc. And the body gets completely left out of this. The kind of work that I'm interested in and that what I try to do is to create actually embodied experiences, which involve the entire sensorium and which resists in some way this dominance of the eye and the ear. That is, we are inundated. There's millions of images produced, circulated, consumed, and in a sense excreted within very, very short periods of time. So while there is this extraordinary production and this apparently democratic production of imaging, I think that we really need to look at the kind of quality of attention that this sort of engagement with sound and image produces. I find my own attention has altered through this excessive engagement with the screen. And what I am interested in is actually, and for me, this is a form of resistance to both capital, the techno giants that rule our world, and the kind of contemporary structure which produces much of what troubles us, is actually in the arena of time and the quality of attention. So if we speak of shifting the gaze, I would rather speak of shifting the quality of attention. These sensorial environments that I create seek to actually open up the possibility of a slowing down, of a shift of attention, I often use media which are sort of in between. They're neither still nor moving. And this immediately creates a kind of interregnum. I actually physically watch people's bodies change as they come into the site of the installation. And this for me is quite critical. So resistance is not only in terms of the content of what we speak about, but also in the kind of formal aesthetic, affective experiences we create and the kind of attention that we constitute.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sheba, and I so agree with everything that you have said, because there's so much content. We are being inundated all the time, and after a certain while, there's a certain inuring that happens. Your senses get deadened to everything around you. There's sort of like a beating down of senses, and so and I think, for me, art is that space where you engage. It's that space, whether it's cinema or whether, for me, that quality of art comes in. It's not the narrative, it's not the form, it's not, because let's face it, we are all challenging those binaries of form and labels, like what is art, what is not art, what is image, what is not, what is cinema, how do you differentiate that from photography? I mean, there's this fluidity now in this space. And so how do you qualitatively think of something as art? And it's exactly what you said, something that engages me more, both intellectually, viscerally, emotionally, and lets me pause as I take it in, or think about change in times. And I think that's a perfect segue, actually, to talk to Davide about the work that he has curated for the festival, which is Apichatpong's short films. Davide, you want to jump in and tell us a little bit more about those films? They are like visual poetry, and they defy any kind of conventional sort of labeling. It's neither cinema nor video art, nor it's difficult to explain. And I have a small, very funny story to tell before I let Davide jump in, actually. So we are working with this OTT partner of ours who comes from a very commercial space, and we had to do that because there are issues of rights, and it has to be a very secure platform, and the films have to be protected. But it's really funny because as we are loading these films on our database, we keep getting these alerts from the people who are loading them in saying, there's something off about this video. It's 2 minutes long. There's only a woman with her hair. Is the rest of the video coming? So it's fascinating to me to see that response, highlighted in red, saying, there's a problem with the film. I just thought it was funny. So Davide, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Sheba for this extraordinary way of putting in, 2 minutes talk, all the issues that I'm being thinking of, not only, being on the other side of the spectrum of artistic creativity, so that I start also as an artist, but then by my middle 20s, I was more involved in working in in a collectivism somehow in Shanghai. My life has been of a white man, taught in Europe, of course, in Italy, but decided to live and to professionally being completely absorbed by a strange place like Shanghai in the 90s, where basically, modernity was coming into a making in an extraordinary, pace and with extraordinary contradictions. So to be and to create together with a community there, an art space that we basically put together from scratches with no money, with no idea what we were doing really. And that space became really a place to confront and to understand and to try to connect, dots between activism and presence, and actually more than activism was really to be present, to create something that it was needed at the time because there was no other alternative for artists, to create a space of expression in a way. And I also have to agree, like Sheba was saying, that for me, it was very clear from the beginning, and then I think is about sensitivity as well, and it's a very emotional direction somehow that you have it or you're not. It's never been about, especially in China, in Shanghai, where, for instance, until the year 2000 and something, video art was not considered art, or film and other aspects, of visual creation was really divided and considered, as different mediums, and also they were somehow subjected by different regulations and limitations in China. What was interesting, it was not about using art in a sense, to go against, but actually how to find through the work that we've been doing spaces of conversation with the authorities, and conflict as well, with authorities and the status quo. But at the same time, what it was extremely interesting in the way that as a group we were actually approaching the the creativity of making art was really to create this space of conversation, and sometimes violent conversation, but really thinking about the other and also the system, as a territory, to understand and to learn, and this kind of attitude, that I think is extremely important, that is really related to an idea also of soft power, is much needed in the way that the art and the images should somehow work into creating also in the contemporaneity, like the zone of negotiations, of being, of staying, of having a voice, of creating content as well, what is necessary, what is not. So there is a lot of, and we'll be talking about Bansky, and there is this huge amount of art that is actually commenting on the contemporaneity in such a shallow and somehow so unnecessary way, and I think that what I learned being in Asia for so long is actually the subtlety of negotiation, of a territory on its own, and the incredible respect for the power of the thought and the gestures that artists have, and which is not at all somehow connected only to a gesture of denouncing, but it's actually somehow this idea of abstraction and way of I can say of purifying messages, creating layers, of complicating things, and somehow doing that, created such a powerful turnarounds, or effects. And with Apichatpong, for instance, I think is actually a very clear, for me, example of this humbleness, of touching things without talking about them, and at the same time, because of that, because of the negation, of the simple accusation of things, they become so powerful and so relevant. In the work that we asked him to produce for a show that I've been curating in Vancouver during the pandemic, which was called Third Realm, and it was basically a curated show of a lot of visual productions that I've been doing in the middle of the 2000 to 2014, based in Shanghai, but actually activating places from Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Korea, among others. It was really to think about how to expand, that period of time and the artworks that was produced there with the idea of the contemporaneity. And Apichatpong created a piece that it says nothing, it shows nothing. It doesn't even use any kind of sounds but rain dropping in October. It's called October Rumbles. And with a very gimmicky and a very simple use of a projected image on a curtain, which is actually banging against the window because of the tempest that is actually, outside in the tropical storm, basically. And it's showing, only with this kind of very small gimmicky gesture of projecting a person lost in the cave with a light, and this light becomes almost like a sort of, I can say, a ghost, that moves through this canvas, which is actually a deep, cave that is not, you don't really know where you are. This kind of strange images that is created that without comment, without words to explain, this kind of magical realm, you know, of you, yourself, and the ancestry, you know, of the cave, and going into this deep hole, you know, that is between present and past. Only to do that, it was so strongly connected to what we've been going on now. And talking about Sheba, what you just said about these images, you know, and these overwhelming images, and the idea also physicality of how you can actually create an environment where you are challenged physically, not only because of, you know, of being on the flat screen and talking to people in distance, which is fantastic. Is actually how you can become much more concentrated also on the inner world of yourself, you know. And if I learn something, and Mina knows how, you know, we are really souls, you know, twins somehow in this kind of I can say necessity of being always a busy bee, you know, and creating like 5,000 things at the moment, and expanding, you know, ideas and concepts and people and networks, and you know, this year has been a gift, you know, of really being able also to differentiate myself from all this productivity, you know, and actually try to concentrate much more into what is important in creativity.
I want to jump to Raghava, because something that Davide said about constantly producing. I mean, I think, you know, me and Davide definitely jump and jump and jump and expand and expand. And it's difficult for us not to make those connections because we get really excited about them. But the person I think who surpasses that in even more crazier ways is Raghava. And I have known Raghava for many more years than I have known Davide or Sheba or anyone. And I want to say, I want to quickly introduce Raghava. Raghava is, you know, was named by CNN as one of the 10 most remarkable people in 2010. And he's a 4-time TED speaker. He's a multidisciplinary artist and storyteller, and his work is shown in galleries and museums across the world. But what is remarkable about Raghava is that he quit formal education at the age of 18 and started off as a newspaper cartoonist. And I mean, I've seen Raghava grow from the time that he came to New York, some 20 years back, almost 15 years back at least. And I've seen him just you know, rocket and shoot off in all sorts of multiple ways, and you know, and redefine creativity in education and technology. So Raghava, with that introduction, you want to talk to us about this past year, you know, reflecting about your practice over the years, and how you feel. What has changed for you over the years?
I don't know if I can answer the last part of it, but if you held a gun to my head and asked me, can art save a bullet? Can art, what was it? Stop a bullet? If you held a gun to me and said, can art stop a bullet? I'd probably say no. I'd probably say not completely. Because the word activism means to activate, to enable for me. And there's an inherent conflict in this idea of activism. The minute you take an idea, a value, and try to realize it, there's so many conflicts. And I love what Sheba said. For me, my body is the place where my ideas meet reality. And there's this conflict. And what I realized is, earlier in my life, I was known as the storyteller, the TED whore, the National Geographic storyteller. But then what I realized in a conversation with my dad is, we realized there are 2 stories we tell ourselves. The first story is the story where we tell the world, this is who I am, this is what matters to me, this is how I see the world, these are my utopic ideas. Those are constructions. And the second kind of story is the story you tell yourself, which is actually, I am not just Raghava. I'm not just a dad. I'm not just a painter. I'm not just a man. I'm not just an Indian. It's a deconstruction narrative. And the funny thing is the two work simultaneously. You construct this glorious world, and then it falls apart, and then you still exist. You're still alive, even though you don't believe it before it fell apart. And you still show up, and you still construct, and then again it falls. So I've had multiple constructions and deconstructions of my own idea of myself. And what I've realized is film and art, each medium has its own temperament, which is why I've dabbled in venture capital as an art medium, in understanding potential utopic currencies, in painting, in sculpture, performance of identity. What I've realized, Maina, through this entire process is that art is a place, whenever I walk into a museum or a gallery and encounter a work of art, the first thing that I am sensitized to is the way I feel, my body feels. How do I breathe when I see a painting? Is it inviting, or is it like Picasso's Guernica? Although I love it, it's one of my favorite paintings. It actually, the scale, the enormity of it, its formal elements are so powerful. It makes you feel so small. I'm very careful now, recently, after my divorce, after my multiple avatars, of the encounter with art, the power dynamic with art, you know? And while art has this way of making you feel powerless very often, film has this beautiful way of making you suspend disbelief and enter a different world. And I feel they're two different mediums, and they have different power structures inherently built into them. And I've always asked myself, if the same idea that I'm working on as an art project were an economic project, what would that be? What would the same idea, how would it manifest if it was a film? And what I've realized is each one of these mediums have their own issues. And what I've become more interested in, as Sheba said, is to problematize those issues more than the content of the issue, is to bring out more questions rather than present any answer. So the storyteller has to both construct and deconstruct at the same time, and be aware of the fact that someone watching this film has lost themselves in my film, has completely, and what does that mean to the experience? What responsibility do I have? What power have I now attained when I'm talking to them? And simultaneously, I think about the same way with the painting. For me, the painting is like a body. In fact, my brother and I have these beautiful conversations about, he's my art critic. He's my conversation about my art. And we have a deal. He never watches me paint. He just comes 3 days after my painting, and we look at a painting. And he would throw an existential problem to me. One day he said, there's this beautiful hadith in Islam, in Sufism, where Allah brings artists to hellfire. And he says, if you dare imitate my creative power, breathe life into what you've created. And if you can't, walk into the hellfire. And so he said, what would your response to Allah be? And I want you to not tell me, but paint it. So for weeks, I was like, yeah, I mean, am I creating a person that someone encounters? What kind of a person is my painting? What kind of a body is my painting? Does it have life? So my initial attempts at resolving this was to use brainwaves to impose your bias on the artwork, thereby being a mirror. So if you get turned on by my paintings, they start objectifying themselves. They start stripping and doing a tease for you. If you start thinking that this painting is bringing out a spiritual aspect of you, they start elevating, they start. So it's a play. Then I felt that it's too gimmicky. I want to try something. Can I say this without saying it so loudly? And I came up with this idea. I felt most alive when I had a conflict within me, when two parts of me were just like fighting with each other. And when the only way I could resolve any conflict is using my personality. And my personality for me is the way one resolves any conflict. So can I perform my personality through my work as opposed to trying to be an expert or to take one perspective, which is why my work has gone past the postmodern, confused appropriation world to a space of presenting my conflicts, So if you ask me, why should someone look at my work? It's to encounter their own conflicts within them and just to be aware of it. And then to ask the question, I'm not talking about a moral stand. I'm not talking about an ethical, moral. My ethics is, are you true to your own way of resolving this? And by resolving this, does that shift your own way of resolving the next conflict?
You did this incredibly intensely psychic body of work when you were in New York, and then you shifted very much to technology, and and then there was a lot of spectacle in your work. Why is that spectacle important to you?
It's a very interesting question. Why do I wear these shirts? Why do I wear these rings? Why do I feel the necessity to perform all the time? Even with my children, I'm accused very often of having a performative relationship with them. We have these beautiful, they can sniff patronizing behavior like this. And I think the answer to that is more a liberation. When there's a question within me saying, why can't you be this? What is wrong with flamboyance? What is wrong with the superficial? A lot of I went through life as I grew in popularity as an artist, I found that my work became more and more conceptual. And what I learned very soon was the visual language of the conceptual is reductionism, is there's a certain belief that anything that is visual is not conceptual. It's doing away with the decorative. And I never felt whole or full when I was not performing, when I was not this flamboyant person. And I could never understand for the life of me why that would take away from creating problems that were exciting for me. Those are the things. My performance actually made me aware. Only when I go to an exhibition and it would blow up, would people get offended. I would say, like, how did you not thank me for this? Wasn't this a collaborative process? Wasn't this? But when I did it in its simplicity, it didn't bring out those emotions. So I find that all of these elements are just like different paints or different elements that you play with. And you cannot divorce the visual from the conceptual or the conceptual from the visual. Anyone who claims they can is a superhuman for me. It is just who I am. And I'm liberating, I believe, my viewer by saying, it's okay. It's okay. Gift yourself that performance. That is what art is for me. When I became an artist, I said, wow, I can do whatever I want and literally whatever I want. Now the problem is, what do I want? Who am I in this activism world? Because I never felt, when you talk about injustice, the biggest injustice is the inability to be flamboyant, to be the agency, to be whoever you want to be.
Can I just come in briefly?
Absolutely.
Please, Sheba.
Yes.
Just thinking about spectacle, I think what we're seeing today is spectacle replacing most democratic forms of communication. It's even been described as a kind of spectatorial democracy because it is through spectacle that politicians, parties, religious leaders, celebrities, etc., actually generate thinking, ideas, concepts, and in a sense construct your way of being in the world, and particularly influence political choices. So the idea of artists who perhaps are coming from a different kind of critical edge, intervening in the language of spectacle takes on another significance. So one is, of course, the great pleasure of flamboyance and performativity, and I appreciate your pleasure in that. It's beautiful. But if one thinks about it a little more carefully, it's a vexed space. So by using spectacle, are we then using, there's that fantastic quote from Audre Lorde, which says the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So are we in that position that we're using the master's tools, and are we just going to kind of end up swallowed up by that structure? Or can we actually use spectacle as a form of intervention? Because spectacle today is a dominant mode of shaping thought, of shaping consciousness. And if we say that art can't stop a bullet, but changes in consciousness can stop a bullet via art, then can spectacle be a method for this? This is a question that I'm also, I don't have a clear answer, but I think it's something that we need to examine. So I just wanted to come in on that.
Completely.
One second. Can I
fantastic.
just add one thought? Because thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Sheba, for bringing this up, because I had this beautiful conversation with a behavioral economist called Daniel Kahneman, who basically taught the corporate world how to exploit the system one, as he calls it, the superficial part of our thinking. And what I realized is very often we do away with the vulnerable simply because it's vulnerable. And for me, as I said, by performing multiple avatars, it is my way of growing as an individual, of asking the relevant questions and when I see performance theater, the political performance theater, I'm actually I understand both aspects of the performance far deeper, having performed it in my own little world. So I completely agree with you. And I think...
And Raghava, just on that point, I actually wanted to go back to William Kelly, because I know that in addition to creating, traditional prints and drawings and paintings, William has also organized and participated in collaborations in public art and theater. And, William, tell us a little bit about that, because you're hearing all of these, Asian artists talk about, performance and theater, and you've had a lifetime of being involved in that as well. And tell us, a little bit about your journey and your sort of experiences with art and theater, public art and theater.
Well, not being able to consider myself an Asian artist, but an artist who actually is in part of Asia,
right.
as we are. It's useful for us to be aware of the dominant cultures that surround Australia to our north. And I'd like to make a couple of comments. One is that, and I think that Sheba pointed this out, that the title of the painting, the title of the film came from, that Mark used, as Can Art Stop a Bullet? It came from something that I had said about 20 or more years ago, that a painting can't stop a bullet, but a painting can stop a bullet from being fired. Meaning, as Sheba was suggesting, that it can influence people to think differently about their world, and not just a painting, any artwork, any image, any film, any book, that piece of theater, and any immersive arts project can do that. And if it helps gets us to think a little more about how we operate in the world and how we might interact a little bit differently with each other, I think that's probably a good thing. So the multiplicity of art forms and the ways of dealing with things, I think, are unbounded in relationship to art. And so, yes, I am what I call a pencil and paper artist, basically. And that means that I really believe that an image that one makes, a drawing on a wall, an image behind me, is the thing that between me becomes a dialogue between me and the person who comes to look at that, to stand in front of that, and then to think about it and find if there's something useful in there. When it gets to the big picture, it becomes a thing which becomes somewhat more communal. And when it becomes a film, it becomes extremely communal, which is where a lot of you, the world in which a lot of you operate. And it just means that it amplifies this from being a private experience that an individual has with an artwork to a shared experience in a large room about this one thing. If you take that and say, well, what happens with these things? My feeling, and Mark will bear me out on this, and I think Fiona also, Mark in some documents that he's written has often said, I'm a humanist artist, right? A humanist activist artist. And I keep sending emails back to him saying, no, I'm an artist and I am a human rights activist. Those are different things for me. My art is a way of saying something about my world and how I feel about it and what I might have learned from others in terms of taking this journey. Activism is a separate thing, and that moves out into different territories. And I don't think that the shifts in politics are necessarily the be all and end all in things. I think we need fundamental changes in our cultures. Fundamental changes that are going to say war is absolutely wrong. We need dialogue. Colonialism in the past has been terribly wrong, and as it's going on in various forms now, is wrong. What happens with the things that you've asked, and I'll go to that now, is I work as a solo artist in the studio, but I love the idea of, and have learned so much from artists who have worked outside. And so I do collaborate with architects on a number of projects. I'm landscape architects in the creation of some public parks and public spaces, things that don't have my name on them. You know, you can't, it's hard to sign a piece of grass somewhere in a large, 100-acre or 400-acre park. But you feel confident that if someone goes and experiences this thing in an environmentally positive way, can not just enjoy it, but move away from it and think that that this is a small part of the world which makes them feel better or more engaged in some other ideas. It's an important thing. Working in theater with in terms of drama, sometimes set design to sometimes collaborative theater, or with collaborative works in dance choreography, as is shown in the film, with Peter Sparling, who was a principal dancer with the Martha Graham Company in New York. These are things which I love the idea of things moving out into the world in various ways. And it seems like everyone there does as well. And I think that's what's really exciting about this conversation and these words that are being had, is that it's not just locking yourself away in a closet and thinking that this is so important. It's saying we have ideas, and in order to express these, we actually need to collaborate as well. And I think that collaboration is a remarkable and wonderful thing. And it too has been very much a part of the journey of this film, but also a lot of other projects I've been engaged in.
What is the iHeart world, and why does it exist the way it exists today?
Everybody's got a view on that. Anyone who wants to jump in first, please do.
Why don't you start, William?
Exactly.
You're too smart, Sheba.
There's probably a sort of a simpler explanation that I'll give, but I'll try to be brief. The museum world essentially is a world where art becomes commodity, and doing things which a number of artists here have done, where they are not commodity in a sense, steps aside from that a bit, and lets the artwork be free to be whatever it is going to be. And when artwork is commodity, it is then framed within museums and public institutions often by those sort of agencies which are ones that reinforce that sort of notion. So the trustees of these institutions are very, very often people who are on the boards of major petroleum companies, major businesses that are not necessarily known for being environmentally sensitive, and often known for being not at all environmentally sensitive, and organizations where profit rather than community is at the forefront. And so a lot of artists become disenfranchised in ever so many communities, in ever so many parts of the world, because their work may question this. And in the piece that I have in the big picture, there's a image of a hand that's coming over the mouth of the figure. And that's a subtle way, in a sense, of saying there's always these attempts to silence the people who speak out. And artists, when there's a oppressive regime, are amongst the first to be silenced, amongst the first to be incarcerated or to have to leave from their own countries. And then you also include also in this journalists, and by artists I really mean all writers, everyone. And that's largely because the authorities that be at that time know that art has power. They know that art can influence, and by removing those artists who are critical of or whose personal belief in their own poetry and life is one that doesn't underpin the values of that current regime, by removing them, they can then engage maybe other artists to sing the songs that they want and to make the images that they want. And so I think there are these worlds, right? And there's many of us who have operated in this sort of more community-based world in a sense. But one of the things that I think has been happening in the past, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 decades, has been that there's been enough voices of those people who have operated in the community and other level, and they've become sharp enough and clear enough and articulate enough that they are finding support in other levels, and that includes human rights film festivals. I mean, as well as so many other organizations. So I'll leave it there for anyone else to jump in.
It's a complicated answer because, of course, you start answering, then you need to, from one point of view, and then you need to change it, and to go somewhere else, So it's really a pickle to find a way to try to be accurate enough, but at the same time to undermine some spectacles, really, of what high art is. And if I bring into the picture the experience of being, in a place that it was not of interest in a way for many years, of what we can say the power system, of editorial, I can say structures that actually the artwork is able to create. And it was China in the 90s. China in the 90s was still a place, not of huge interest. And what it was coming out, to the big public is very limited. And it was already artists, that been operating in the 80s and the 90s. But then the growing discontent and the growing, the powerful new imaginary that artists were working on in the middle of the 90s on was somehow not voiced out, because simply the structure of power and of what is edited as, through institutions, in global institutions were doing, was not really into other cultures, and it's something that we all see actually happening anyway, so there is a discourse that is actually very much created by ways of approaching art that comes, let's face it, from what we can define as a Western world, America and Europe mainly. And then there are other narratives and other ways of approaching things, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of what is interesting, what is important, and what has a meaning, in different kind of cultures. So what is high art at the end of the day, somehow, and then for me was very clear at a certain point in China, is that when the commercialization, came into the picture in China, creating a booming moment at the beginning, basically in 2005, 2006, when the first art fairs were brought in, by a very powerful group of collectors from Europe and from Switzerland into Shanghai, and creating then an explosive way of approaching at the time a certain kind of Chinese art as becoming a new commodity. That is what I feel created, this kind of distance between the art that is created and the value of the art is being created, and creating not only a commodity, but also this idea of trying to create spectacles of what was happening in China, summarizing it and somehow flattening it, in a way that it became a common recognized, art from China. Of course, this is, I tried to summarize, and, as I was saying at the beginning, it's so complex that we could actually have this topic on, for hours and hours. But I think that for me, it's not really about high art or low art. It's about how actually people is, and that I connect with what Sheba was saying at the beginning, is how things are displayed, how are actually connected to an audience, and how conscious you are of where you create things and how you display them and how you show them, and and I think this is really what's also, this is part of the conversation that we've been having along with mine a lot, is about how how you edit that, and for which reasons, and I think people, no matter what, and in my experience, I see all the time, is that everything is possible, to create like incredible exhibitions in museums, or working, in public spaces and creating, much more relational art, but it's actually the context, and that gives a certain shape of what you do. And no matter what, the moment that in this, in a sort of a small environment, or in the, high, by definition, the high places of museums, of institutions, whatever you create in this kind of environment, if it's genuine and if it actually brings out, a certain kind of ethics and soul, that it doesn't become high art and low art anymore. It just become art, and then it become, and people connect to them, and I saw that because in the last few years I've been really, experimenting a lot also on commercial venues, or trying to displace really, people and artworks, and the experience between people and artworks in places which are not per se thoughts, for art. But the moment that you do something genuine, and the environment you're in, and you know how to use that environment, people react to that, and then it doesn't matter if you are in a museum or anywhere else. So, and that is actually part, and then I conclude part of the problem also of how art is exhibited in museums, you know, and the accessibility of that, for instance, and the role of that. And let's not forget the fact that, you know, most of the museums are actually products of imperialism. You know, they come as display of other cultures, you know, or display of this kind of power, right? And so how actually museums are developing and trying to find ways, you know, not only to become spectacle of that kind of heritage, you know, into something that actually is much more dynamic, much more diverse, but also brings in, you know, the equity of creating, you know, a conversation between the soul of the art, you know, and give this genuinity, not, you know, not perceiving the art as per se something that is out there and difficult to connect to, you know, but actually to bring it into a clever way, you know, of experiencing it, you know, in a much more somehow human level at the end of the day.
I completely agree with William and David, and yes, this is also how I see it. I just want to bring in a simple historical fact that at least in India, South Asia, the separation between high art and craft or artisan production was produced through colonialism, and in fact absolutely feeds the imperial project. Earlier, there was no separation even of mediums. If you look at pre-modern forms of expression, they often integrate sound, light, image, spatiality, etc., etc. And there was artisanal production. There's what's called a little dismissively indigenous art. I think you also confront this in Australia, or vernacular art, and the creation, the artificial creation of high art. Now, this was not only colonial, it also suited Brahmanical patriarchal power structures within India.
Absolutely.
Which asserted through linguistic superiority, the superiority of Sanskrit as the primary text even for aesthetic appreciation, and again created a divide between high conceptualization and low conceptualization. So these contradictions actually have now fed into the commodified art object and the kind of location of art practice which proceeded from the Euro-American post-Enlightenment ideology. So just to bring that historical note in. So in fact, what we find today, which is I find really interesting, is an attempt within the Indian contemporary world to acknowledge, I think this is also happening in Australia, to acknowledge, for example, Gond painting or Warli painting as contemporary art, not as a tribal practice, not as an Aboriginal expression, but as contemporary art. So these languages are shifting, these definitions are changing, and we need to actually push the envelope here further and further. A lot of my work actually works with what is called the popular. I work with street toys, I work with Bollywood, I work with a number of things that are not normally within the frame of high art. High art also produces its own kind of, and this is really to do with the money. It's simply to do with the money. It produces a kind of snobbery, a kind of exclusivity that we understand this, ordinary people don't understand this. And my experience and all my experiments with public art, and I've put in installations in a shopping mall, I've put them in a public library, I've gone into a number of very different sites, I've even put them in a trade fair, where I did work that was considered quite abstract on the physical nature of light. And there were lots of issues with the work and with working within the context of a trade fair, but there were people queuing up to enter the immersive installation. I used to actually go outside and say, this is not the laser show, which was very popular in the trade fair, and this is not the fun fair part of it. This is an art installation. You really want to come in. And they'd stand and wait. So a lot of this arrogance about the ordinary public doesn't understand contemporary art,
Exactly.
I think is bullshit. So,
Firstly, the question about high art or popular or low art is a Pandora's box that you have opened, and thank you for opening it. Having not come from a formal educated background, this is something I'm very sensitive to. So to answer your question very briefly, especially since this is for the youth, the art world that we call the art world consists of art collectors, artists, curators, galleries, museums, each one with their own agenda. The historians that are trying to stitch a narrative that's coherent across. So European art, for example, what we understand as European art was probably less than 1% of the art produced, in representing less than 1%, which is typically the case. And by presenting this perfect narrative of visual culture, it gave Europe a certain continuous image of a culture that was not truly lived, but was imagined. And if you look at for me, John Berger said this beautifully, and it's more relevant now than ever before. He said, high art, he spoke of high art and museums as clerks of nostalgia for a hegemony and decline. Mm-hmm. And I think today it's more relevant than ever because ironically, the first time I attended an art fair in India, I attended a panel called Giving Power to the Populi Through Public Discourse. And when I attended that, it was entirely by academics speaking in extremely verbose language. And I put my hand up and I said, excuse me, I've paid 500 and so have the 500 rupees for this. And how can you give power to the populi through verbose language? Isn't this the very medium? So the problem of trying to be good in the art world is it's become a token, much like we bring our dogs in or our potted plants in to be nature aware, you know? And I think it needs a radical shift. We have favored depth over superficiality. Even when Davide mentioned values and spectacle, I could see there was a moral stance which we need to do away with. I believe that this is the time. This is why I'm using Instagram to create high art, the same philosophical arguments as self-help, which is a taboo in the art world. So I think this is the time for the youth to ask these questions. And often you will find us really like stammering and stuttering and trying to really articulate this because there is a hegemony, there is a linguistic hierarchy, there is a value system that we are forced to adopt and not question. And one of which is activism in art. Is that the role of art? Is it a social role or is it an individual growth role? And these are important questions to ask. And thank you for asking it.
I just wanted to add one thing, if you allow me. You know, I don't remember the artist that wrote that, but I think he's amazing. And it's like, it came out like a few years back, and it was an artist who doesn't speak English is not an artist, right? And if you think about it, you know, from the other part of the world, you know, the other part of, and here we are, you know, all of us speaking English, even with accent or whatever, right? So, and it's so incredible, right? And I see that because I'm here in Venice because I've been invited to teach a master in curatorial practices, and in between my students, you know, I divided them in groups and I invited them to work collectively and not individually, for instance, you know. So I try to really shift this idea of egotism, for instance, in art, right? And of course, we have all very big personalities, you know, and we are extremely well, you know, able to the exercise of deconstructing them, and creating actually this kind of link in between them, force them into collaborations, in an artificial way, because the group were decided by us and not by, their
choice.
Choice. And it was amazing, for instance, to see that, well, like 2 of my students are actually Chinese. So how the groups that actually happen to have a Chinese-speaking person who doesn't speak very well Italian, how to integrate that into the picture, and only this kind of element created incredible creativity out of it, And so now we are trying to formalize things, and it was and then so yesterday they came to me, all the group, with and they put on the table and they said to me, like, well, what we want to get out of this experience is actually represented by 2 things that happened the first 2 seconds we met as a group, and they both they brought on the table 2 things. One is called jujubes, the Chinese jujubes, the dried ones, and then on the side it was like mustard, honey mustard, and some bread, right? And I said that when they met the first time, the first way they had actually to try to connect somehow, because they couldn't speak the same language, was just to introduce, some of the food represents something for them, right? So, and that gesture, it was so simple and so powerful and so diligent in a way, right? That because it was so poetic as well and so humble, that represents somehow the other side of what we are talking about, that is not about about the language, but it's really about the connection between people, right? And the ability to understand in the symbol of a gesture, how to summarize all this complexity, and yet creating something that's so powerful, so emotional, in the presence of the other, right? So voila, I wanted just to add this little point.
Can I add just one line to what you said, David, and just responding to this conversation
Please.
as art? This Sheba talked about conversation as art, but the beauty of conversation is the tonality says more than the content of the conversation. And the question about the art world is, what is the tone of the art world? Who is speaking louder? Who is speaking from a position of authority? The other day, my daughter came to me and I told her something as simple as, hey, I bought you this gift. Can you please say thank you? I need a thank you. I need that validation. And she just stared at me like I insulted her, I offended her. It became a massive fight. And much later, she told me, Appa, the minute you raise your voice, my body shuts down.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that the tone had so much, my intention was pure love and honesty, but my tone was from a position of power. And I didn't realize that tone had so much more to do with that reconciliation than the content.
So I don't want to be dismissive of all, gallery or art or museum spaces. I think they play a very vital role. But I think that, and all of us are limited as well. Like, we're talking about power, but like David said, I mean, we are all English speaking. We all come from places of extreme privilege. And we create those hierarchies ourselves, so in terms of, and I think that when we're talking about a world that is stratified, we're seeing, such polarized ends of economies, we're seeing, marginalizations. I mean, we are as much part of the problem as we are the solution to it. And that sense of responsibility that each of us has as instigators or creators or, channelers of what we see, like Sheba said, there's so much, but, and it's true, there is so much, but there's also so little, look at what we've seen in India or in Delhi. I mean, we've been inundated with images of violence. We've seen riots during the time of the pandemic. We've seen, exclusion, the kind that, a lot of Delhiites never imagined they would see again. And there's so little that has left us. There's been such little space where communities can get together, where practitioners can get together to think about what is it that we are seeing, what does it tell us about the times, how do we sift through this, how do we create a new repository of images that pushes back or shifts the gaze. And that's what this festival is also about, is to bring all of your voices and all of your thoughts and all of your experiences, and let others have the time to kind of sift through it and have it resonate within them, and realize that, as all of us are feeling isolated and feeling the challenge of this extraordinary time, but to realize also that there are so many others who are, if not physically, but then intellectually, emotionally, in solidarity with each other.
Our spaces for dissent, for conversation are shrinking. We're facing the rise of fascism all over the world, not just in our particular countries. So let us work with every possible site to keep the imaginary open, diverse, multiple. It sounds so banal and self-evident, but let there be increasingly as many voices and images as possible who keep diversity and inclusion alive in this time of homogenizing, flattening, and the reduction of thought.